Hey everybody, this is the House of Shade. And today's episode is co-hosted by Red Eyed Bear and Anon Silk, featuring special guest and Shade Protocol founder Carter Woetzel. In today's episode, we discuss what led Carter to develop the protocol, we deep dive into the Shade tokenomics, and we learn about an upcoming application that will be introduced in the coming months. Now let's jump right in and join Red Eyed Bear and Anon Silk for our first episode of House of Shade.
All right. Yeah, I'm so excited to finally get this project out in front of the community. It's been about 2 months in the making, House of Shade, and it's finally coming to fruition. And what a better person to have on than Carter. Thank you for joining us, man.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. It's so heartwarming to see phenomenal community members from all over the world unite under this very, very early on vision. And I think House of Shade speaks to the fact that there are many people with many stories that need to be told, and that this protocol is more than just a price chat telegram, more than just a white paper. There are ultimately people behind it, and people and stories are powerful. So thank you for what you guys are doing.
Yeah, it was just a couple community members that ended up coalescing, realizing that the community needs a little bit better education out there. And it's not a dig on any of the developers or any of the core team. They're obviously loaded down with their own workload. And this is something that community members this is like a perfect position for community members to fit. So happy to be able to do this. The team that we're working with is absolutely phenomenal. Still fairly small, just 4 people, but it's been a great ride so far. And it's finally nice to get this out in public. So today we're going to end up talking about tokenomics of Shade Protocol. But before we get into that, I just want to let you, Carter, talk a little bit about how you got interested in the stablecoin narrative, and then kind of your progress through blockchain industry to where you're at now.
Totally. Yeah. So 2017, I had a cousin in TradFi chuck me some links on LinkedIn, started falling down the blockchain rabbit hole, was taking notes on this technology. I checked out every single book that I could conceivably get my hands on. And the one thing that was really obvious to me is all the writing was very rushed. You could tell it wasn't super well written, and there was a couple diamonds in the rough, but for the most part, it's either way too tech focused or way too focused on investing. So 40, 50 pages into taking notes on this emerging technology, I'm like, wait a second, I think I might be writing a book right now. And education-wise, I have a computer science and finance background, so it's really blockchain is just at this perfect crossroads with economics, game theory, and it was the part that really drew me in. Is it's just so much experimentation, TradFi, traditional finance. You don't get to play around this much, but we had this whole community of people that were challenging all the assumptions about Web 2. Can we decentralize things? Can we give sovereignty back to users? And not only can we do that, but can we do it cheaper? Can we reduce the middleman, right? And so I spent 3 years deep researching blockchain, and that's when the privacy problem emerged. It was we have these centralized exchanges, we have, these other blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum, and wallet correlation is actually not crazy difficult to do. And everything's completely transparent. How are we going to bridge payments and applications to the real world if I go up to a hot dog stand and they're going to be able to know every transaction I've made since the beginning of time and my entire bank balance? That's a massive security risk that normal everyday people are not going to be willing to take on. And so my longstanding theory has always been the reason that the privacy narrative hasn't super taken off yet is that blockchain actually isn't that integrated into our everyday lives and functions yet, right? It's the sad truth. But the more integrated we become, the harder it is to run from the privacy problem, and the more this, privacy solutions are going to be needed in order for us to scale adoption-wise. And so that's when I found Enigma, which is a layer 2 privacy solution on Ethereum. There was really big scalability problems there. I was a part of the blockchain ambassador program with Enigma. So I was just a total community member, just where can I contribute? What can I write? How can I educate? I was really passionate about the collegiate scene and kind of educating students there. And eventually it migrated to being a layer 1 known as Secret Network, built with the Cosmos SDK. And in September of 2020, Secret Network launched privacy-preserving smart contracts for the very first time, which is a huge moment. No one else had done it. I met Mohammed Petla. He is the founder of Secure Secrets. I'm also the co-founder of Secure Secrets. It's a validator securing $30 million plus worth of assets across 5 networks. But more specifically, Secure Secrets is one of the core protocol contributors to Shade Protocol. And we started grabbing developers because we had a dream, right? It's like privacy DeFi needs to be made, and it doesn't seem like it's being built out in a cohesive fashion. So like if someone else isn't going to do it, then like we should go do it, right? And that's really where the dream kicked off. I could backpedal a bit and talk about how I've been obsessed with MakerDAO and DAI and stable coins on Ethereum for a very long time. Terra Luna's algorithmic model was just like mind-blowing. And so the obvious next step was, what are the biggest problems in DeFi? How can we solve for them? And ultimately, like from day one, we've always said we want to build products on Secret Network that even if there wasn't any privacy, they were still innovative in their own right. Like we feel really, really strongly about that. Privacy is a very, very strong feature. It's absolutely key. It undergirds everything we do. But in order to get user adoption from other Web3 platforms, you can't just be like a half step up. You need to be like so far ahead that people cannot deny that what you're doing is better, and that's the reason they're gonna make the jump. So anyways, that's a little bit of background. I know I just went like 20 different directions. Feel free to like narrow me in, but question.
No, that's fine. I'm glad you gave that full scope, just because I think everyone's story of how they get to understanding that privacy is one of these aspects of blockchain technology that personally they think is critical. So everyone's story is a little bit different there. So it's always interesting to hear the people who are building stuff, hear what their story is and how they came to this conclusion themselves.
Yep, totally.
Yeah. So before we get into the tokenomics, I just wanted to highlight why we're talking about tokenomics today. In looking at various projects, this seems to be one of the things that end users kind of focus in on as one of those things that can make or break a project. And I think it's very true, depending on how you allocate your initial tokens can definitely impact the way you can build in the future. And so making sure individuals understand the logic behind the tokenomics design is really crucial for making sure that individuals can assess whether this project is something they want to invest in. And so understandably, there was a lot of FOMO building up to the tokenomics release. Like everyone was foaming at the mouth for it, and we finally got it. So we're going to break it down today and try and give a little bit of inside look into the logic that was used to create the tokenomics. So
totally.
First part want to talk about is the airdrop portion. That's the part that end users right now can interact with, and that's what's kind of on everyone's mind. Obviously, the full protocol and other primitives are going to be coming out later down the road. But for right now, airdrop is what's on most people's mind. Just to give a little bit of background on the airdrop, there's about 14.5% of the shade supply that was going to be airdrop. 20% of that was available February 21st, which people can go claim now. And 80% is available upon the launch of the protocol and key contracts. Just personally, I think this was a great way to break up the airdrop. I think it's super important to be able to properly incentivize users to come back and use the protocol, because there have been plenty of airdrops that I've been a part of where there was just no incentive to interact with the protocol. Like you might like the project, but there was the utility either wasn't there or like they didn't do a good job marketing it. And so I think for Shade, with how big of a following it already has, 4 or 5 days after token launch is awesome. And so I was just curious about why you guys decided to break it up like that. You obviously could have given everyone their tokens initially. That way, potentially we could have had a little bit more liquidity put into the market. So I was just wondering why you broke it up the way you did.
Totally. I mean, it's for a lot of the reasons you stated, right? Like we wanted to get the token out there, establish a price feed, right? Because Silk launching is very much contingent upon Shade having established liquidity, having an established price. So having like Shade out in circulation for a while and making sure that there's stability surrounding the dexes and what the Oracle contract will be looking at was quite important. And specifically, I'm calling them the utility contracts. That's how I'm kind of framing it. You have Shade staking. You'll have the ability to conversion mint between Silk and Shade. We'll have basic governance proposals. So there's lots of all of the actual utility that gives Shade its fundamental value. Those are in progress, which we're going to have a development update soon, post airdrop, another developer roundtable where we sit down and say, hey, here's the state of the contracts, right? But I think by splitting it up task-based, we're going to give users that initially maybe didn't have a great first impression of the protocol, right? We can just say that the claim experience was nothing short of like disappointing, I think, in terms of the throughput and people wanting to get their claim, all that stuff. And like, we can call a spade, right? But I think the beauty of only doing 20% now and 80% later is Shade does have an established price, which means that other 80% has value. And once we launch those utility contracts, people already know about Shade protocol. They might be huge fans. They might not be, but they're definitely going to come back knowing, oh, wow, like there's value sitting there. And all I got to do is interact with the protocol. And our number one job as developers and builders is to have that UI UX experience be so good on the other side of this once the utility contracts go live that people are inevitably going to stake and lock up their supply or liquidity provide, right? So you nailed it on the head. We wanted to disperse out the emission rate, slowly build towards the utility contracts and then the launch itself.
So when that 80% does become available, is that something people will have access to all at once, or is this also like there are going to be multiple things you have to do in order to unlock it?
Yep, it's going to be multiple things to do. And this is actually like an ongoing discussion because I'm somewhat in favor of like the very first task should be Shade staking. Like, yep. I'm hoping we have a full-blown video saying like, here, like, hold up, like before you claim, here is why Shade staking is like phenomenal. Like this is what you're about to participate in. And so then I think we give, 20 to 30% unlock for the Shade staking task. Maybe we let, week and a half go by. We make sure everything's good. And then we do the next task, which is like convert Shade into Silk. At that point, Silk has gone live. We make sure arbitrage stability is all good to go. Then you wait a little bit longer and then maybe you do your first governance proposal or whatever that final task will be. So on the flip side, one could say, no, just do it all at once. Try to do all the tasks at once. Boom. There's probably be more supply shocks, which is okay. Like supply shocks at the end of the day are large bag holders selling and distributing and decentralizing the protocol. Like the people that can shift price the most are people that own the most of the token, right?
Yeah.
So it's like liquidity shocks, they're painful, but like we would work through them if it was just all at once. I really think splitting it up and slowly kind of walking through that process continues to have people engaged with the protocol over time and then gives us a chance to make long-term fans. On the flip side, people are like, no, just give it to me now. I'm unhappy that I have to wait, right? So it's trade-offs and totally open to what people think is optimal on the final 80% and how we unload it,
One of the big things that I'm thinking about as you're saying this is in the tokenomics, it details when the atrophy will start happening, like the clawback of Shade. And I think it said it's about a month after Silk launches.
Silk contract, yep.
So people will still have plenty of time to do all the interaction, like that second wave of interaction before the atrophy happens, right?
Totally, yeah. You got a full-blown month. And it's like Silk contract going live is going to be like probably the final contract, right? Like everything, we're trying to bring everything online and then like Silk, and that's the big, everyone sits there and is like, all right, like, does it pull it off? Are we able to maintain peg?
Yeah.
And like personally, full disclaimer, I haven't let out a big sigh of relief when like the launch. Like it's like great, tokens out there, cool. But until Silk holds its peg and it's out in the wild, for me, we haven't really done much yet. We launched a token, it was multi-chain. That is very impressive in its own right. Huge props to the devs, the team. But the biggest milestone as a community needs to be like Silk is launched and holy smokes, it's doing what we said it would do. That's when the real excitement comes in. So
yeah, and that's what you want out of a flagship product too,
Yep.
So I'm super excited about Silk coming here, and there's all kinds of other stuff that are going to be being unlocked and released right around that time too. So not only do you have Silk to look forward to, but all these other primitives and utility contracts that you can interact
You
with.
know something, Red-Eyed Bear?
So as far as this atrophy that's going to happen, in reading some of the articles that have been posted by either Secure Secrets or just talking with other people that have witnessed the claim rate with other airdrops, it seems like a high participation airdrop typically has claim rate of about 50%, which personally kind of blows my mind. Like, I would imagine that something as valuable as Shade and Silk to come in the future, people would be just doing everything they could to claim it, but yet we still potentially have 50% of people who aren't going to claim their Shade.
Can't know to claim it if you don't know about it, right? And I think that's I think the higher the participation rate, the better market penetration we had on, Atom and Terra. And we have to be careful with it, right? Because these are communities that view what we're doing and they're excited they're getting an airdrop, but they might not be happy that we're building some primitive that can compete with them. So how we've gone about announcing the airdrop, I think we got the majority of our coverage at announcement. But since then, it's how do you make sure those people are aware of it without doing it in a way that's disrespectful to those communities in any capacity? It's it's that interesting song and dance. So my gut says we only have a 35 to 40% claim rate when everything's said and done. I hope it's 50. I hope it's 60, but I think multi-chain means those communities are going to be less likely to participate. So,
well, I mean, you guys did just about everything you could to let everyone know that you took inspiration from these other groups. You're not shy about it, and you want to definitely give these people props where they're at. You're doing everything you can to be give people credit where credit is due. But as far as that atrophy, so does that mean potentially we have 50% of the airdrop that gets clawed back into the community pool?
Exactly. Yep. It could greater than 50%. It's just 100% dependent on how people claim it. So, and that would be, 14.5%, roughly 13.5, depending on how much goes out for the incentivized testing. So half of that's 7%. So treasury could be as big as 17% out of the gates then. And then if you add on really the grants pool getting merged back in once we get governance up and running, that's an extra 12%. So then that's up to 32% for the treasury, which there's some subtractions from there because there's already grants that are already happening as we speak. And I would hope the community votes to have, allocation from treasury go into the grants program. I'm not exactly sure how that onboarding will work. If it's that allocation has to get voted on and pushed, or is that tranche of tokens already established once governance goes live? We'll find out.
Gotcha.
Talk more with the devs about that. But
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the incentivized testnet, just because one, this is a great way for any community member to get directly involved with the protocol. Honestly, I think it's as easy as just raising your hand and saying, I want to participate. And as long as they still have room within their testnet group, you'll be able to be added, and you can actually see how things progress and what the initial product looks like, maybe your minimum viable product, and how it gets to something that's market ready. And honestly, I was able to participate in the incentivized testnet, and it was really cool getting to see how things change. And then obviously once the airdrop was live, seeing how things changed after the fact, things that we were super, super excited about, this is going to be make it super smooth, super easy. And then, sometimes things have to change on the fly due to network conditions.
Yeah, shout out to the devs who were in chat during that whole testnet initiative. They really had their finger on the pulse. They were not missing a damn thing. That was well executed.
Yeah. Shout out to my brother, Austin Woetzel. Some people don't know that, but I got brother on the project, and they were developers, front end developers were absolutely meticulous. So if there would have been perfect throughput on everything and everything would have gone down well, I think people would have been wow, this claim experience is top tier. But you can't account for everything, and we did what we could. And to talk about the incentivized testnet, there was a form that went out for people to get feedback, and top 10 best feedback are getting some amount of shade from the incentivized testnet category. So that still needs to be accounted for. And there's also the PEG research team. A couple people have done just phenomenal work, and we're going to do a better job. It's been so absurdly busy, but sometime, let's see, it's the 28th of something week. We'll outline hey, here's how you qualify. Here's what's pulled aside for testers. We'll add more structure and visibility on it. So far, it's just been so chaotic trying to get feedback that type of handoff of tokens and to testers has been more chaotic than I'd like, and we can do talk about having a better job. And I'd also highly recommend having one of the PEG research people onto House of Shade. People ask me, they're like, so tell me about like the composition of silk. And I'm like, I honestly like there's like 4 people that know way more than I do about how silk works, the composition of it. I just know what the end goal is. They took it and sprinted like 1,000 yards ahead. So highly recommend getting them on the show.
Yeah. Oh, we've definitely been in talks with them and definitely want to bring them on. Me and Anand were both on a PEG research call maybe a week or so ago, and it's so eye-opening to get to talk to these people who really know what they're talking about, like these economists. And most of them are really good at like not dumbing it down, but like making it very easy for new people to come. And I know they're working on documentation to make it so that anyone that's interested in contributing to the PEG research team can read this documentation and basically pick right up where they're at, which is really, really cool.
We've been talking to two of the guys who are definitely trying to come on House of Shade, and just a little teaser alpha for those of you who are going to be tuning in during that episode. The benchmark that this gentleman created is just absolutely mind-blowing. And the way it ties back into silk and its stability, man, there is such a bright future here.
Yeah. So many future conversations that I have in regards to the PEG. But just to kind of get on to the next aspect of the tokenomics outside of the airdrop is the development fund. Obviously, this is something that hits home for you, Carter, especially. Yep. So just brief synopsis, these are funds that are going to be used to help build out key Shade primitives and also secure integrations for Silk and Shade. It accounts for about a little over 23% of the total token supply. And yep. I think this is one of the areas that the tokenomics for Shade differentiates itself from other projects just because of some of the core principles of Shade protocol that kind of help shape the logic behind the development fund. And the one that I want to highlight most is just that no application unique tokens. Yep. And also not sacrificing UX for tokenomics. And that not sacrificing UX kind of goes back to no unique application unique tokens.
Totally.
Yeah. And so it's really cool to, once you think through it, be able to see that the allocation towards developer funds actually reflects these principles. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about why you guys decided to go with a little bit heavier development fund, and maybe talk a little bit about that core principle of no application unique tokens and why it's important to the Shade protocol.
Sure. I'll start with the application and I'll jump back to the numbers. So it's amazing how much more simplified it is working with partners when everyone's applications are all working together. It's like essentially we're creating a massive revenue share model. And the instant you have a new token, like that team and that product automatically has a fork in the road, right? And like L1's experienced this. Applications are not built to like 100% give value back to the layer 1. And so by having all of our primitives and the community members and the team, like everything that gets done is just, it's all for a public good. There's no one going off and like launching some side thing for self-gain in that sense. So I'll talk to the 23.25. Ultimately, we've pretty much roadmapped out like 6 years worth of development, if not more. Like we've thought that far ahead. And so the core development team and contributors have to envision a world where we have a team north of 50 people, north of 100 people. And so it is a quote unquote scary amount. Like I think if you look at like airdrop distributions, I would say we're probably, let's say like upper 1% quartile is somewhere between like 27 to like 35%, right? Let's say that's like 75% to 100%. I would say we're probably like 55th percentile. I think we're like slightly above the average, like not as decentralized as it could be, not as over centralized as it could be. And I think part of that is just we have such a clear primitive product vision that it's like we don't need to account for an infinite number of applications necessarily. We need to sprint after the 10 to 15 key DeFi primitives, and having those initial developers being able to scale that out to other teams within the core contributors and sprint after that, it feels like it's a trade-off that was worthy of making. Now I will say this, way back, that number was originally 30, like right around 30%. So we clawed that all the way back to 23.25%. Just to give people an idea, like originally it was even a bigger number than that. That's how much conviction we had. But then we had more conviction about, what that represents to the community, and 23.25 is where we landed. Maybe it should have been 18, maybe it should have been 20, right? Like at the end of the day, these are the things that you can debate endlessly. But what I do know is that we have really good leaders and builders behind all of this. And like, I trust the leadership within the core contributors to use those funds ethically and to push Shade to the next level. So,
yeah. And in thinking about this and why developers would potentially want to build on Shade protocol versus creating their own application and their own central value capture mechanisms, as a core member, what do you envision being the hardest part of onboarding new developers? Like, is it have to do with that value capture for whatever application or application layer product they're creating? Or do you think it has to do more with documentation and tech stack stuff?
We've actually surprisingly, so this was one of my biggest worries. I remember it was like 8 months ago. I remember like in my bed, just being like, how are we going to this is a problem. Like, it's usually people have their own application tokens. And so it's like the reason they go launch a token is because it's very lucrative to launch token. So how are we going to get really, really good developers to come build on Shade if they could just go launch their own token, right?
Yep.
And so far what we've seen partnering with other teams, the biggest advantage we have is that we, as a core group of contributors and as a community of developers, what we pretty much tell people is all you have to do is make the contracts, right? We got brand covered for you. It's the Shade brand, right? Mm-hmm. Done. Community solved. You don't have to build your own community or on your own token. It's already solved for you. You're joining the family, right? So we have the community, we have the front end, we have the brand, we have the UI UX testing. Literally, we do, as a community, as a group of developers, once you join this family, everything is done for you. All you have to do is build the contracts. And so what you do is you'll find builders, as we have so far, all they want to do is just build the contracts. And then it's just, you have to be able to have the humility to compensate people really freaking well, right?
Yeah.
And have them get enough tokens that they're participating in the revenue share model, and such that the primitive they built is like, oh yeah, like that's, I'm receiving from that. And the end goal is one day we bootstrap the DAO enough. That's not necessarily, I mean, you could always give out Shade tokens from the DAO for developers, but one day it could just be like, like, I'm pretty sure this primitive can produce X amount of revenue, so we're going to put up like a 10 million silk bounty for this to be built, right? And some people are just willing to work straight up for the silk. They don't even necessarily need the Shade, like long-term revenue share. And so it's about finding the right developers, finding the right community. But long story short, I thought it was going to be a huge problem. And the answer is there's a certain appetite. There's a certain type of developer that has an appetite for just building contracts, and they don't want to mess with anything else. They've tried to do it before. They don't want to mess with community integration. They don't want to have their own brand. They don't want to have to build their own front ends. So if we can just do everything for them, because you're joining this suite of applications, except the contract development, it's a match made in heaven. So
yeah, I didn't even think about all the other things that really go into building that. Like, you can have all the contracts and everything behind the scenes looking good, but you still have to market it. People still have to use it. You got to create branding, all that. So it almost sounds like Shade is providing like a best case scenario for builders who really just want to focus on building, which is awesome.
Exactly.
Yeah, especially like given the way that I see this DAO evolving over time, that might serve as incentive enough alone for builders to want to come and build for this incredible DAO.
Yep, totally. It's going to be so interesting to see it play out, because like at the end of the day, launching your own token on average probably could be more lucrative, but it's like a risk reward thing. And some builders just truly love building, and they just want to build great applications for users. Not every builder is someone that's like, how can I just like extract as much value as possible? Like, there's good people out there that just like believe in privacy preserving DeFi and want to build that platform for people. So it's just fine. It's really finding the right people. We've had to say no to some builders. We've had people that didn't understand the vision of 100% of the revenue goes back to stakers and the DAO, like for the key 100% key primitives. And that's a tough pill to swallow, but just because you have a couple people that don't see the vision doesn't mean you can't find the right people. And so far we have.
So as far as the funds that developers are actually getting, I saw within the tokenomics release that over-the-counter deals are going to be something that users who receive funding from the developer fund are going to be participating in.
Yep.
Can you maybe highlight why over-the-counter deals are actually a really good option for the developers?
Totally. So essentially, OTC gives you two opportunities, right? The first opportunity is you can define a contract where the counterparty has to commit to providing a certain amount of liquidity or staking for X amount of time or unlocking that deal, like those tokens over the course of a certain period of time. So that simple fact means we can make a transaction with another party that like wants to own Shade, and they're going to provide value to the protocol in a way that makes, you know, the impact of, like, let's just assume they're a malicious actor, quote unquote malicious. Someone who sells Shade is not malicious in my mind, but we'll just for this thought experiment, we're gonna say whoever's on the other side of the OTC is just gonna dump it, right? That's the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Why would we not make a deal with someone else that's gonna provide liquidity, stake, secure the protocol, and then have them dump at the end of those terms versus the team just like selling right on the open market? Because that's the quote unquote worst case malicious actor. That's what we would be doing if we did that.
Yep.
So it's really about like finding the right counterparties, and like also in the world of like decentralization, I think there's like some misnomers out there about like whales and institutes. There's like a lot of fear around these things, but there are legitimately people with like a lot of capital that like they just want to hold the token and support the protocol long term. So I have OTC lists that are very, very long, and like there are many people that get X'd out because it's just like you're not a believer. Like I can just, you know, like you talk with them, you can tell they don't care about the protocol. So not only are they providing value for the protocol, you also have a chance to identify if you can pull someone else into the vision and have them be here long term on the marketing side, on the awareness side, on the networking side. So I wanted to, like, we put the OTC thing in, like a lot of projects wouldn't say that. They would be even afraid to bring it up as a topic, but I just want to like lay the cards out there. It's like there are operations attached to the core developers, and at the end of the day, there has to be some sort of tangible sovereign currency to be able to pay people out. And one day it will be Silk. Right now we can't do that, but life becomes a lot easier once Silk enters the equation too.
Awesome. And are there, just for maybe anybody out there who wants to participate in these OTC deals, is there like a formal way to get involved with that, or maybe that formal way will be unveiled in the future as we get closer to a full protocol launch?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can like feel free to ping me. I think the best thing you can do is be like a proven community member for Shade Protocol. Like we're definitely biased towards community members. And then there's probably questions like, oh, like what's the minimum amount for participating in OTC? And I don't even know necessarily like if there's necessarily like a floor. I mean, I think traditionally people like to do floor of like $10,000 worth, $15,000 worth. And so this is probably taboo that we're talking about any of this. It's great. Like most projects, they don't talk about their OTC deals. Like it's very like guarded private stuff. But at the end of the day, we want to give community. We're biased towards community members. We want to work with people that are going to, you know, give back to the protocol in the process of those two. So
that makes total sense. Well, that's awesome. That's a great synopsis of the development fund. Honestly, it sounds like you guys have definitely thought this through on the best way for you guys to receive the funding that you need to be able to go full time and really to focus completely on Shade Protocol. So yeah,
I'll say this too. Like we're trying to be the best stewards we can of funds, in the sense that like this office, for instance, we're fitting like 8 people in here from the team, single office, monthly rent about $850 a month. All right. So I've heard of teams where it's like, oh, like they went and bought a, you know, $10 million house. And it's like, what the frick? Like we're not like, that's so like that. We're going to be the best stewards we can. And definitely once we get through the madness, like I would like to be as transparent with the community as possible with how funds are used. So once again, very taboo, but we'll see what we can do on that front.
Well, at least you guys have an office. I honestly was envisioning you guys all meeting at your house, just like
well, we did for a while. There was definitely lots of meetups, and we've been in here for about since the beginning of February, pretty much. So it's been good.
Okay.
And we have people outside of, full disclosure, we're in Minnesota. There's people in Canada. There's people in Puerto Rico. There's people in India, Pakistan. I mean, community members all over the world. So, yeah.
That's so awesome to hear. I love that. This is just kind of taking a step back from Shade. Just like the crypto industry has given me some of the best networking opportunities I've had in my life. Meeting people from all over the world, getting different perspectives. And I imagine that's exactly what you want in a building team. You know, you want all these different perspectives. You don't want everyone to be the same, thinking on the same kind of wavelength. So that's really awesome to hear.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you got to be willing to have a team of people that challenge every assumption. Like the risk in a system and in a community is when people like are afraid to criticize and afraid to ask the hard questions. And I hope with Shade Protocol, like privacy is like one of our fundamental ethos, but privacy does not mean that we don't disclose and ask hard questions about things that are public goods. And so I hope
It's funny.
I hope people. Yeah,
there's like an inverse relation there. Like public fucking blockchains, they'll be like, well, you know, privacy is sacred, so they're going to be as non-transparent as possible. But here in the secret network, we have people who are like, you know, privacy is a core ethos, but do you want to know this? Come on in. Like it's so much more friendly in that sense.
Well, and I think it's an advantage that, like, as a community, I've seen a lot of privacy projects where like the founders are completely anonymous and there's not really like people. And I still firmly believe that, like, for a privacy project to like scale pretty quickly with what we have in mind, that there has to be a human element. There has to be people that are willing to be doxxed for the greater good, essentially, to be like, no, like, I value privacy and I'm fighting for your right to privacy. And I've actually given up my privacy indefinitely to be able to help the world be a better place with this technology. And like, that's a leap that, like, personally, Carter Woetzel, I never get that back. Right. Like, yeah. That is name. It's out there forever. The accountability, the responsibility of that. And that weight does keep me up at night, but it's worth it. Like, I believe what we're building is absolutely worth the sacrifice that was made on that front. I do think it's an advantage for us as a protocol. We're willing to put a human face to what we're doing. So
I would totally agree. It definitely helps humanize the project and realize that, you know, in situations where things don't go exactly as people wanted it to, being able to realize that, and we're all humans. You know, we all make mistakes. There are things that we could have done better. There's, you know, we can also agree that we did super well on some things. So having someone that can take that constructive criticism and be transparent about what the community is saying and the response is super important.
Totally.
Yeah. So next portion of the tokenomics I want to talk about is the community pool, or the Shade DAO treasury. Just a little bit of background on this. We kind of touched on it previously. 10% of the initial Shade allocation is going to the treasury. And the treasury is basically a decentralized balance sheet of assets controlled by Shade protocol governance, used to help stabilize Silk while also generating sustainable yield for those Shade stakers. And so maybe you can give a little bit of color to why you guys went with 10% allocation towards the treasury. Obviously, you want to have a real nice core allocation of assets to be able to help stabilize the protocol, especially once Silk goes live. Just because that treasury is going to be paramount in helping stabilize Silk. So just, can you maybe give a little color on why you guys decided to go with that percentage?
Totally. So 10% is like, the goal of the treasury is to be a bunch of uncorrelated assets, not just Shade. Like, the long-term power of the treasury is we're gathering other layer one tokens on it. We're staking it. We're gathering LP tokens from bonds. We're earning passive yield. It's all going back to the treasury. So the larger that Shade number is on the treasury, it's kind of like, with how the Sky arbitrage mechanism works, the end game is to have other uncorrelated assets that are participating in the buyback and participating in the arbitrage. Because if it's just like Shade buys back Silk to push it back to peg, that's an interesting little recursive system that's not nearly as sustainable as having uncorrelated assets. So originally that treasury number was much larger, but then as we looked at it, it was like, the majority of the stability that the Shade DAO is going to provide to Silk will come from the uncorrelated assets that gather on it. And so you jack the number up to 40% or something huge. It's like, it's still the Shade token backing Silk, and that's got that weird reflexive thing. And it's not that that mechanism doesn't work, because it definitely does within the context of arbitrage. It's just, it's stronger if we're more focused on long-term uncorrelated assets gathering on the DAO and contributing. So it's like, why 10%? It's like, well, larger numbers than that start to lose its impact on growth of the protocol in some other category, right? So yeah, that's kind of the logic behind that.
That makes total sense, and especially considering the long-term goal of the treasury is to amass as many of these uncorrelated assets as they can. It makes sense that you would see diminishing returns for stability as you increase your Shade token allocation towards the treasury.
And I will say the community will have like the opportunity, like there's like the grants program, for instance, like there's merging that's happening later on. And so it's going to be up to the community. Like, do we want grants program to be even bigger? Do we want it to be smaller? Do we want more on the treasury? And it's like, it's going to be up to the community. So it's just making sure that the tools are in place for the community to collectively decide on it. So,
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned governance, because this is, I haven't been as excited about governance in blockchain space as I have been since I found out about the plans for Shade. Specifically just because it really does seem like the community has the power with the Shade protocol, which should be like a big deal for end users. Because personally, I think Shade has massive value capture mechanisms, and I see a really good road for it ahead. And knowing that I, as a holder of Shade or staker of Shade, have a say in, how some of these funds are used it's really empowering, honestly, for the end user. So seeing how governance is starting to really shape up and finalize is really cool. I'm interested to see how the actual UX works with the governance, and I'm not sure if you guys have finalized anything on that, like where governance will kind of reside. But maybe you could give a little bit of information on that.
Yeah, it'll definitely exist within, the app. I mean, the dream is you got your app, and you got your staking, your lending, your swapping, your bonds, and like you got everything there. And there's also a tab that's governance, right? And that's going to be its own rabbit hole. I don't think governance should be put too far away from the regular end user experience, because we want end users to know that there is in fact governance, and this isn't just some Web 2 server sitting out there that's not controlled by much. Like it's decentralized, right?
Yeah.
Governance was really interesting. It was coming back from a Miami crypto event. I missed a flight, and I was at the airport at it's like 1 a.m. in the morning, and I had a flight at 7 a.m. And so I ended up spending 6 hours in an airport, like on the ground, like writing up the white paper. And it's like, it was beautiful, because just like always going around solving problems. So to have the chance to be able to just like think about governance for like 6 hours straight, no distractions in an airport. And so that was like the birth of it, was literally that I remember thinking, like, what are like the very obvious problems with governance? And it's like, well, it seems like with these really big DAOs, these really big treasuries, it's like 5 to 10 people. They make decisions. Community doesn't really have input. It's just like, here's a Discord announcement about how we use the DAO funds. And it's like, well, that's not decentralized, right? That's worrying that baseline token holders aren't really a part of the everyday activities of this treasury, which they're governing. So that's where the simple idea of like the sanity checks came in. There needs to be a way that there's accountability every time the DAO makes a decision. There needs to be some sort of visibility, but at the same time, you also have to give the flexibility for these branches, which we've elected people onto the branches, to perform their everyday duties in an effective and flexible way that this whole system can scale. We have to give them that flexibility, but they have to have accountability back to the everyday user, which begged the second problem, which is, okay, we have these sanity checks, we have these flexible multi-sigs. What about the end user that doesn't give a rip about governance? How do we solve for that? And like answer, oh, you keep lowering quorum. Like, what if we add in a third party? That's representatives. Really simple concept. You can put your vote with someone else and you can walk away. And these individuals are probably going to be publicly doxed people that say, here's my address. This is what I stand for. This is what I'm all about. Let's give votes to those people. We have some sort of thing that resets periodically. Could be every 6 months, could be every year. So users have to delegate it to a new representative or the same representative.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the concept. I mean, it's kind of mirroring the real world, like let's say US government. But the thing is, when my legislative person makes a decision, I have no visibility on it. Yeah. Versus with Shade, your representative or the branch does something, boom, on-chain event is triggered. And actually, as a baseline token holder with sanity checks, I know exactly what every branch of the DAO is doing.
Yeah.
Right? Powerful stuff.
Will it function similar to how delegators can delegate tokens to validators and that the validators can vote for them, or they can individually vote themselves?
You can always vote for yourself, or you can let your representative vote for you. I want to steer away from the validator language because validators specifically are securing something, right?
Yeah.
A representative is just a wallet that votes. That is their service to the larger system. They're not securing the protocol necessarily. Like it's very much like a public servant, and maybe representatives will be people that go above and beyond such that we're like, yeah, like it makes sense we would cast it. But anyways, it's very unexplored. It's very new. Please join the governance chat. Please talk about this stuff, because as with like the Silk research, the PEG research stuff, I hope a whole group of people like take it and run with it and are able to like arrive at a solution that allows the DAO to be flexible but gives that underlying accountability to baseline token holders.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, one of the things I really like about it is that in the real world, when you exhibit rational ignorance because you don't want to go through the minutia that is law, you elect a representative to make the best interest in your decision, but they're incentivized to do it. And something here, like you said, there's transparency. You're doxing yourself as a representative, but there's also no incentive other than who it is that you want to look out for. In the real world, there's people, building roads and yada, yada, yada. Like, of course, they're not going to be able to be very involved with governance. It's a little different here, as we are all like, pretty much financiers on the internet right now. But still, for the people that don't have their finger on the pulse of governance, that incentive alignment is it's very interesting, and I'm really excited to see how this plays out.
And I think it also adds like a face to governance, because even like validators are quite unknown. And I hope as a community, we push to kind of like humanize this whole governance thing. It's like, I would love to be able to like open up a page of like Shade Protocol representatives, and there's like 40 people there, and I can read their stories, and they're around the world. It's like, wow, this is like really, really cool. Versus it being kind of just like, and like, I think there will be representatives that can be private and anonymous, and we'll definitely respect that 100%. We're not saying you have to be doxxed, but I just think it's like a really unique opportunity to bring, like, blockchain governance hasn't taken the leap to like public representatives being out in the open, just serving a public good.
Yeah.
And one question that's come up is, have we considered incentivizing governance voting? Have we thought about incentivizing representatives? And I'm just going to say this, not going to make that centralized decision. I'm not going to say it's up to the community like that. I don't know. I don't have the answer, guys. Like, do we incentivize voting? Do you represent? It's up to the community. I don't have the answer for you. So
yeah. Well, this is what that the governance Discord's for. Go ahead and hash it out in there, talk about it. Have more than enough opinions and different viewpoints for people to give, positive and negative feedback to that. Just to circle back though, and talking about a really important part of the community pool is the Sky arbitrage contract that's tied to the community pool. I know that a portion of allocation within the general treasury is going to be used to help maintain the stability of the peg, and Shade stakers will end up giving up a small portion of their staking to help secure the peg, and I'm assuming that allocation is going towards the Sky arbitrage contract.
Correct.
Could you maybe, just for anyone that hasn't heard about the Sky arbitrage contract or doesn't really know much about arbitrage interactions and opportunities in general, can you maybe give a brief description on what that ARB contract is for?
Totally. So we'll assume Silk is equal to $1 to simplify this example. Right now, if Silk is targeting $1 and on the secondary market on a DEX is trading at $1.02, there needs to be a way to push Silk back to its target peg of $1. So the way algorithmic stablecoins work is anyone in the world is able to convert $1 worth of shade for 1 silk that the market is valuing at $1.02. And so there's a 2-cent spread there because the user could sell this $1 worth of silk for $1.02 because they directly interacted with the minting contracts. Super powerful function. They've expanded the supply of silk. They drive down the price of silk to target peg. Everyone's happy. Reverse scenario is also true. Silk is trading at 98 cents. There's an opportunity to convert 1 silk worth 98 cents for $1 worth of shade. So you shrink the supply of silk, you reduce the amount of sell pressure because you're pulling it out, and then you've really expanded the supply of shade. And really sharp people will say, wait a second, so you're essentially like pulling on the market capitalization of shade to push it back to peg, and the answer is yes. And this is why having a fundamental floor of value for shade tokens tied to tangible economic value is so freaking important. And it's what Terra figured out. Their 2 fundamental revenue streams are swap fees from Luna to UST and back and forth. There's a little swap fee that goes to Shade to the stakers, as well as the transaction fees on UST. So Shade Protocol has the same thing. We have the Silk transaction fees, we have the swap fees, but then we actually add on top of it because all the other primitives that we're launching, those revenue streams are also going back to Shade stakers and Shade token holders. So the reason we're okay with contractionary events where demand for Silk drops is because the thing that's backing it, Shade, does have a fundamental floor of value. And Terra Luna makes the same exact design assumption too. You have to. It's how it works. Now, when we initially researched Terra Luna, there's 2 entities at play. You have retail arbitrage players and you have institutional arbitrage players. We said to ourselves, what if we can add even more stability to the system? Can we add some additional entities that are neutral and decentralized to this entire system? So this is where the idea for Sky arbitrage was born. And so because it's even an older concept than that, it really, I guess the original idea was like, all right, a shade staker, they're locking up collateral, they're earning APR, but what are they doing for the protocol? What risk are they taking for the protocol, right? Like locking up supply and reducing circulating supply isn't necessarily like building towards the public good. Yeah. So that was actually like way back. That was actually what really triggered the concept, was like, what can we do with their collateral that would help the greater good? The answer was help arbitrage and maintain the peg, right? Yeah. So now you have Shade staking collateral, goes into an arbitrage contract. And so now whenever there's an arb opportunity, when it's above or below peg, it performs the conversion minting, grabs the profits, and gives it back to the treasury and the Shade staker. So there's another revenue stream, right? And then we also add on treasury collateral into this whole system too. So now instead of retail and institutional, it's retail, institutional, staking collateral, as well as the treasury participating in all of this. So Luna recently has purchased $1 billion worth of Bitcoin, right? Yep. It's handled by an entirely centralized entity. Okay. Ours isn't. Our backing for Shade Protocol in terms of treasury and staking, that's decentralized, man, completely. So if we have $5 billion in uncorrelated assets on the Shade treasury, it's not centralized like that. So I'm not going to harp on it now because we need to prove that the DAO grows and we get to that end game. But one day, I think we'll have a very strong argument that like our additional entities that back the entire system are way more decentralized, and therefore there's less risk involved actually. So
so as far as the Sky arbitrage contract goes, the allocation of treasury and staking collateral that goes to that is flexible, right? Governance has the ability to change that.
Totally up to governance on that front. Personally, at least with how we instantiate it, it's either going to be 50 or like 100% of Shade staking collateral goes to the ARB contract. Like it's decently aggressive. Yeah. We've had some discussions internally though, where we think it might be best to establish the retail and institutional ARB before Sky even ever gets activated. Just from like a security standpoint, it's like establish your ARB community, make sure they're all good to go, and then like slowly kind of ramp up how much Sky participates in the arbitrage. And I'll bring this back to another very fun moment that I'm assuming you guys heard about recently, but it was like how White Whale has suffered from this. White Whale and Terra, it's an arbitrage project where people passively earn revenue from locking up collateral. It arbs it for them, right? So they ran into a fundamental problem. How does an on-chain smart contract participate in arbitrage and somehow be faster than institutional players, right? Like it's a totally unfair fight.
Yeah.
High level institutional bots versus just like a decentralized smart contract. And so I was thinking about this for a very, very long time. And one night, answer kind of popped up, or was like, we can never have a faster bot. It's not going to happen. We'll never be able to do it. But what if we're thinking about it wrong? What if instead of trying to have a faster bot for Sky, what if instead we have different profitability ranges that no one else has access to? So that is how Sky works. The conversion minting fee that exists for everyone, that generates fees for stakers, that arbitrage players have to interact with, the Sky arbitrage contract doesn't suffer that fee, which means we have access to profitability ranges that no one else in the world has access to. We're essentially giving our arbitrage contract a monopoly on certain profitability ranges.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have to be careful with that because you don't want the Sky contract to be the only arbitrage player, right?
Yep.
But you do want it to be able to be a participant in the long run. So that was the design space solution. Don't try to be faster, be a part of a different profitability range. And that will actually create sustainable arbitrage for us over time because we can have that contract be triggered like 10, 15, 20 times a day. And then we can guarantee like some level of APR potentially from SkyArb back to Shade Stakers. And that's a whole revenue stream that like other protocols, they don't have that. And the only reason and this is the beauty of an entire interconnected DeFi ecosystem. Like Terra Luna is not going to give White Whale permissioned access to their conversion minting contract because it was never part of their principles that everything should be unified together, right? We're starting from day one with the assumption that everything's connected. And so we have the ability to have creativity with how we solve these problems because now Sky is interacting with conversion minting contracts in a special way. And as we launch all these primitives, we keep having to challenge ourselves and be like, we have more design flexibility than any other protocol because all of our primitives can interact in a way that no one else can.
Yeah.
So it's very exciting.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't even mention like down the line, having some of that revenue directed towards a pool that we can eventually deploy to stabilizing synthetics. Which is just mind-blowing, the amount of flexibility that this DAO actually has.
Yep, 100%. Ooh, don't get me started on synthetics. I'm a little too excited.
So,
we should probably have a standalone episode for synthetics. That rabbit hole is very freaking deep. But
so kind of along the lines of the community pool, next thing I kind of wanted to touch on was the grants, which will in the tokenomics release, they talk the release talked about migrating the grants program eventually to the community pool, which I imagine would also simplify the user experience there, not having governance separated, having everything kind of centralized. Just to give a little bit of background on the allocation towards the grants, there's about 12.3% of the total supply was allocated towards the grants, and these grants are used to accelerate the development of key Shade Protocol DeFi primitives, Silk adoption, and also community growth. And some examples of those that were given in the release were hackathons, milestone-based products, and also community initiatives. And so one of the things that I took away from this that's really cool is that all of these grants are like the funding for it is approved through community signal proposals and Shade governance. And so, while early on, governance is heavily dictated by the core members just because they have the largest allocations. That makes total sense. But as the protocol becomes more and more decentralized, people are going to have more power in their hands, and the funding from the grants will end up being, what does the community want to see built? What does the community support? What does everyone think we need? Which I think is really cool. And and looking at the article, it says 4 different DeFi primitives are already being built out as a result of the Shade Grants program, which is killer.
Already in progress. And one thing I think is super exciting about the grants program is with this dream of branches, you could have a spin up a branch that is devoted to just hackathons and a branch devoted to just app development, right? And so like the level of like permutation that can trickle down and the level of like specificity for like what these little pieces of governance are handling, like really opens up the room for community specialists to emerge that can best handle those funds for the sake of the protocol. Just unbelievably powerful concept. And I'll also say that like the way the treasury and governance is being designed is like these different branches have to request funds ultimately. So grants could have more than just 12.3%. It could be 12.3% plus a bunch of other uncorrelated assets. So the design space is very open, and grants program is absolutely key to the long-term success of the protocol.
So when can people, individuals or teams or projects, start applying for grants?
Right now, there's a GitHub for Shade grants. It's secure secret / Shade grants. Is kind of the place where that's living temporarily. Of course, in the future, that can be migrated to a different place. And we can probably link that below in the description. Yep. But come one, come all. Like we're taking the position that we'd much rather aggressively allocate capital, as a group of developers, hopefully as a community. Like that's the best path here. We have a very small window in time, so we want to move quick and we want to take leaps of faith on people.
Gotcha. That's awesome. So want to move on to the next part. It's kind of squishing two things in together, is looking at staking and LP reward allocation. I know you guys are using, as far as incentivizing stakers, using the osmosis thirdening model. And while you're waiting to establish non-inflationary rewards for staking incentive, which that last little part is what interests me the most, this non-inflationary rewards. Because if you look at the graph of the thirdening model, eventually there will be no more shade emissions for staking. And so that the incentive has to come from somewhere else. And so focusing on trying to generate these rewards, whether it's through treasury bonds, synthetics market, like revenue from other primitives, is that it just seems kind of groundbreaking. I'm not sure if there are other projects out there
I wouldn't say it's groundbreaking. I love the word, but I'll say that I think there's a massive problem in DeFi in that like people have like these 10-year distributions, and then it's like people just like, oh, like it'll be good when we get to the end of the 10 years. Why not just keep throwing the dart down the road? Oh, 30-year distribution, right? It's like, no. Like the problem is you need real, legit economic value generated from your primitives that create sustainability.
Yep.
And I worry about the models that don't acknowledge that and aren't able to like spin up enough revenue streams, because inevitably they have two choices. Everything breaks, which is not good.
Yeah.
Or they switch to an inflationary model. And we could have a whole episode to talk about my philosophy on inflation. It'll take a very long time. But regardless, it's not optimal. So as we release tokenomics, we wanted to be very straightforward about, hey guys, like these LP rewards, these staking rewards, they're great, they're lucrative, but don't conflate this with actual genuine long-term revenue streams.
Yeah. And then as far as looking at how LP providers are going to be incentivized, I think it's important, and I know you guys think it's important, to incentivize people providing liquidity. Obviously, people need to be able to, if we want Silk and Shade to be as available and it be kind of that default or de facto payment method for Web3, it's important for people to be able to have really easy access for it. So being able to incentivize people for that is super important. But I also think it's interesting, you guys are taking that same sort of approach to the staking. Like, how do we make staking sustainable? You're now looking at how do we make LP rewards sustainable, kind of taking that same approach of, can we get non-correlated assets to be able to provide revenue streams for this, which is, I think, is so cool.
And it's not a can, it's a must though. It has to happen. And so the LP rewards we're providing, the goal is that the treasury is going to be able to gobble up as many LP tokens as possible in exchange for these Shade bonds. And one day the treasury will issue bonds that aren't even Shade bonds. You could issue a secret bond and try to grab some other asset, right? Like we have that design-based flexibility, but absolutely protocol and liquidity, 100% key. LP models, they are rent models, and by definition are not as efficient as like protocol owned liquidity, just period. Like you can just think back to real world scenario, like renting an office versus owning an office, right? Like these are the long-term trade-offs. So,
and I did pick up one thing that of note in the release is that the Shade LP rewards aren't going to be going live until there's an audited double-sided LP reward model available on Secret Network DEX, or if there's a primitive on Shade that ends up getting built. And I was just hoping if you could provide a little detail about like what that model would really need to look at or look like.
Right. So double-sided LP is like, let's say you LP secret shade and you would receive CFI rewards and shade rewards. Or like on Sienna, you provide, secret shade, you receive Sienna rewards and shade rewards. And so we just want to make sure that the LP reward stream doesn't get pointed at any sort of rewards module until it's like audited and good to go.
Yeah.
And obviously, like we've alluded to, potentially other key shade primitives, that could function as a DEX potentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's good to just like have patience with it. And as a community, the initial gut instinct is like, oh, like we want all the liquidity, but like we want to make sure it gets applied safely when it does get applied. And that whence, that's definitely not a word. That was like
it is a word.
Once the shade rewards start getting pointed and liquidity starts coming, we want to make sure bonds are in place to capitalize on that deep liquidity and start building out that long-term sustainability. So it's a timing thing.
Yeah, that's killer.
Yeah, it's funny the paradox that exists in crypto because it's the fastest moving space imaginable, and yet at the same time, charts are trading in the tightest of ranges until they go insanely parabolic. And I like the approach of like launching shade as an empty shell and doing all of these things carefully with creativity, even though you just said, we have a small window in time here. So it's just such a funny trade-off.
It is, definitely.
Yeah. So just going to move on to the next segment. So this is kind of getting into something that people might get a little uncomfortable talking about, but it's definitely important to understand is private raise. So first off, just want to start off saying congratulations on the private raise. I know you guys were very excited to have that come in. And for anybody that hasn't read the tokenomics or the tokenomics release or hasn't done any other digging on this, they raised $5 million, which is approximately 7.75% of the total supply. But this private raise was oversubscribed by $7.5 million. So they rejected, these private funding partners. So that kind of speaks to they're being selective about the people they're partnering with, the capital that's being allocated there, which I think in some sense can calm people a little bit. But I want to give you, Carter, the floor to say, like, what were you looking for in some of these potential partners? Like, why did you choose some over the other?
Yep. So I'll start with the number, right? I'll start with 5 million because that was the initial target, and then everything's kind of reverse engineered back from there. So 5 million specifically, so we can spin up essentially a team of 20 plus people to go as fast as possible. These are people with day jobs that are software engineers that work in traditional institutions, and it's like, how do you get someone to take the leap where you can give your full attention to this? It's not split part-time, like it's like you're here 100%, you're a Shade core protocol developer wherever you are in the world. And so 5 million back tested with salaries, back tested with numbers was like pretty much required to make everyone take the leap. And it's, I want to say, like, I've been seeing these fair drops. People's like, oh, like, why don't you do like the 100% fair drop? And like, my answer is that no one on this team had any pre-existing wealth. Like a lot of the people that are launching these fair drops are like developers that have already been in crypto for a super long time. And like, they don't need, like, they have the flexibility to do that. And for us, it felt like a scenario where it's like, we needed some capital to be able to make the dream come alive. Actually, my webcam just popped off there. 1 second. 1 second, guys.
You're good.
Webcam, don't do this to me. This is supposed to be the portion with the most transparency. Oh, let's switch it to this. What's going on here? Well,
yeah, worst case scenario, we can still hear you. So that's the important part.
All right. So yeah, well, I'll try to speed up here. So $5 million reverse engineered was like, all right, this is the target amount. And then we had the evaluation number that we had to debate for, right? Because there's obviously like the private sale token price. People can reverse engineer it pretty easily to figure out it was $6.45. Mm-hmm. So we were arguing that we had a $64 million valuation, which is quite bold, by the way. There was plenty of people that were like, that's way too high of a valuation. So VCs were trying to get in at an even lower price, potentially like $2-3. Like I don't want to be part of your raise unless you lower your valuation. And it was kind of like, nope, like this is the value we believe in. And so if we would have caved to that kind of pressure, more supply would have had to been given up for like the 5 million. So it was definitely like a tooth and nail. This is what we stand on. This is the valuation that we can justify. And on the oversubscribed side, yeah, there's so many people that wanted in on the private raise. And like at the end of the day, we were looking for partners that genuinely have a history with investing in the privacy layer one narrative. So, and people that have a proven track record of being quality VCs, not people that dump on projects. Yeah. So we put a lot of research into it, and yeah, I guess hopefully that gives a little bit of rundown about why 5 million, why the 7.75% is essentially reverse engineering from 5 million and arguing for a certain valuation. So
yeah, and I think one other thing that's important to note here for anyone that's concerned about private raise partners dumping on them. Dumping their allocations once their vesting is complete, is if you look at the way that this vesting release schedule works, it's a linear vesting schedule, and there's just a little over 1,000 shade unlocked per day spread across these 25 partners. And so in looking at the logic behind this, the linear vesting was chosen because it helps smooth out some of the supply shocks,
Yep.
So these private raise people, they're not waiting with no return, no way to interact. They have the ability to slowly interact with more and more of their allocation as time goes on. And it kind of encourages people to interact with the protocol rather than just looking for that payday, which I think is really important.
Projects that do the vesting, we did the research, and it's just there's very strong correlation between you slap a 6-month curve on someone and they're just going to forget your protocol, come back in 6 months and be like, oh, I want my upside now. Right.
Yeah.
That's not at all optimal. The other part I want to speak to is like, people are worried about the 7.75%, but what I would say is if a VC sells off funds, guess what happens to the protocol? It becomes more decentralized.
Gets stronger.
Right. Yeah, so it's like at the end of the day, it's like, yes, people will walk away with wealth in an asset that's not shade, but at the end of the day, we're decentralizing the protocol. So it's a short-term pain, long-term, it's healthier for the protocol. Obviously, would we have preferred to just have 5 million without giving away any percentage of the protocol? Of course, like that's probably optimal. But we had a set of constraints, and we managed it and fought and advocated to the best of our ability to have that number be as small as possible. We were even asked by a couple people to raise that number to like 12-13%. There is VCs that said, hey, your maximum ticket size is way too small. I don't want in. Right. Yeah. Like, that's too big or too small. And like, that's, once again, I just wanted the community to know that like we tried our best to filter out very, very not optimal entities. Yeah. So,
and looking at the way that the linear vesting schedule works, it would seem that we're going to continually see liquidity in these pools increase as these players get these small allocations, and one of the only things they can do right now is provide liquidity.
Yes.
And so that's a real easy way for them to get interacting with the protocol and also generating a little bit of revenue there. So that's something for anyone, kind of thinking, when are we going to see the liquidity start showing up in the DEXs? As time goes on, we're going to see that liquidity just continue to go up. Obviously, only to a certain point, but
Silk will be a big solution too. Like once Silk goes live, and the demand for stablecoins is very organic, and there's not much stablecoin liquidity in Secret Network. So I think it's going to be the launch of Silk is really going to usher in this next generation of liquidity on Secret Network, and also the launch of perhaps like a lending product, one could say, would also drive more demand for Silk and liquidity.
There we go. So just to talk on the last two small parts of the tokenomics, want to talk about launch expenses here. I think it's really important that projects have these allocations for launch expenses launch expenses specifically aimed at marketing and branding or additional branding. It does you no good to build this amazing protocol if nobody knows it's out there. And maybe this kind of speaks to why some tokens have really low airdrop claim rate. Is just there's not enough money put towards launch expenses, like really hitting marketing hard, really making sure your branding is on point.
Yep, that was like the video you watched and all of the Silk Shade branding and the brand book that exists out there that will probably be put into circulation at some point in the near future. Like these are all just like incredible partners that are aligned for multiple years. And I can't speak higher of these entities because Shade Protocol would not be where it is today without those people. I promise you. Like the branding is so strong. The logos, the color palettes, all the front end stuff you've seen that came from those teams helping with mockups and UI UX, and they'll be continuing to do that for all future primitives too. So these are partners that are like super tightly aligned with us, and I absolutely love those guys. So
that's killer. So in looking at the graphical representation of when the emissions will stop for launch expenses, after the emissions stop for the marketing and branding, will allocations towards marketing and branding come from like either the community pool, like a proposal to spend spend funds from the community pool, or potentially the grants branch?
I've been told by these entities that they're here permanently. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. That's obviously like contractually, that's not how contracts work. But like if you're holding a good amount of shade, like you're very, very incentivized for the protocol to succeed. Like I said, it's a massive revenue share model. But specifically, yes, I think the core development team will for sure be playing a key part in marketing and the events and whatever have you. And I'm hoping that on the community side, the grants program, potentially through some other entities that could be spun up under the Shade DAO, would also play a very, very key role in marketing in the long run. So
that's awesome. Well, that pretty much covers most of the tokenomics. I know we've got a couple general questions that we've generated internally that if you've got a little bit of time, we'd like to go through at least a couple of these.
I could sit on this podcast for 10 hours straight, man. Whatever it takes. I'm here for the long haul. So.
Appreciate it. So one of the things that I've been thinking about most is how the protocol is going to go about delegating or maybe like best using these uncorrelated assets in the treasury. Yep. So if you're accumulating all these L1 tokens, you're eventually going to get a sizable enough delegation that you actually have some sway amongst the like validator sets potentially for these different L1s. So I was just curious how you guys, or have you thought about how you're planning on managing those delegations? I'd imagine you would use the same sort of principles that you kind of use to shape who gets the airdrop from Atom or Luna or Secret.
Yeah, so currently Jack Swenson's the contract developer on this one, and it's been initially designed where it equally distributes out. So let's say we have 10 million secret staked on from the Shade DAO. It equally distributes out the secret to the different validators, essentially. Like as secret comes in, it kind of distributes it out. But as we've seen with like performance issues lately, there might be some flaws in that approach because it's almost too equitable. In the sense that we probably want to prioritize validators that are performant, because every time, I don't know if people fully understand this, but like every time the larger a validator is, the more blocks they process, and therefore the more influence they have on the performance of the protocol, like the actual UI UX experience. So if the Shade DAO is staking millions to a super, super large validator and that validator is not performing, then the Shade protocol UI UX experience is actually worse. Yeah. So there's an argument that's emerging that like the secret staking derivative that's being launched in the next couple weeks, as well as like the treasury, should have some form of criteria that's biased towards layer one community members that are really big contributors, as well as that are performant. And maybe at the end of the day, this will literally be, once again, a standalone branch that manages like who are a part of these validator sets.
Yeah.
starts to get a little messy because those validators are earning revenue, right?
Mhm.
So then they start to have economic incentive for colluding and trying to be the ones that are delegated to from the DAO. So things start to get a little messy on that front. That's why the initial approach was like very neutral uniformity. So there's going to be trade-offs to however we go about it. Hopefully that sheds some light on some of the initial thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my initial thought was, will Shade Protocol, because it could in the end be such a sizable delegation, does it make sense for them to spin up their own validators for these different L1s? Or do you just try and be as equitable with like a high bar of requirement for like what you expect out of validators that you're delegating to? Just try and spread it equally. So really just any insight was helpful.
Yeah, we'll let the community do more research on that. And like, I think the idea of like having a node devoted to it is like, well, where's the accountability on that node's revenue stream, right? Like, let's say there's a Shade Protocol node and we want like 100% of the revenue to go back to the DAO. That would ultimately come down to like a human organization somehow having the ethicality and transparency to ensure that happens. So that doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means there's trade-offs to every one of these types of setups, and we'll have to community. This is your voice. This is your protocol. So
no, that awesome. That makes sense. I personally have just one more question for you. If Anand's got another question for you, then I'll let him throw the last question is. But I've been reading more and more about central bank digital currencies and looking at how that sort of landscape is setting up. And I can't help but think that, there is going to be competition between these CBDCs and Silk in the end. And so I'm curious to hear from you if you think that these central bank digital currencies pose a like legitimate threat, not necessarily like a regulatory threat, but a capitalization threat to Silk.
Give me 10 seconds to pause and let me think.
Oh, take your time, man. It's a loaded question for sure.
Sure is.
I think whenever we talk about currencies, it always comes back to attributes. And so what are we competing on, right? All right, let's start with decentralization and permissionlessness and censorship resistance. Like boom, Silk wins, game, set, match, right? Privacy, sovereignty. Who wins on that? Silk, game, set, and match every single time. Stability, anti-inflation. Silk wins on that every single time. So really, what is the CBDCs like? What's their advantage? It's like, well, accessibility and liquidity, right? And those are very, very massive advantages. Make no mistake about that.
Yeah.
Fear too, for the average Joe that doesn't want to dive into all of this minutia. They'll say, well, this guy's job is to look out for my best interest, even though the truth is a little bit more complicated.
No, totally, and it's that's why currency is intimately tied with community and trust, 100%. So I think accessibility, and trust and liquidity. These are going to be our uphill battle. We've nailed the rest of the attributes if we do this right. Now the good news about accessibility is that's solvable. It's solvable. The trust and community and the liquidity side, like these are permanent uphill battles that never come to an end, ever. Period. You can never be accessible enough. You can never have enough trust, right? Like you can never have a big enough community. And what I've always said is, I remember I've had people along the way, and they look at the tech, they look at the vision, they look at the roadmap, and they're like, all right, this is all good, this is better, but like I don't think you're going to be able to win on the adoption front. And I'm like, if you're telling me that your only argument against Silk and Shade Protocol succeeding is adoption, then game on.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
I'm happy to help with that challenge as well.
Yeah.
Well, that totally makes sense. When I was initially reading these things, I was thinking more about like CBDCs that come about in economically or socially oppressed communities,
Right.
like places where you're you're actually restricted in what things you have access to. And I guess at a certain point, there is like a limit to what Silk can do as far as being accessed. Like if you don't have internet access or you don't have, like if certain things are filtered, then it's not a whole lot that Silk or any other solution could do. But
yeah.
And you got
the internet. The internet is definitely a core dependency,
Yeah.
and that's it's true.
100%.
Yeah, well, when people talk about it being a great equalizer, not only with information but access as well, this is exactly where I see Shade Protocol giving that truth validity. But just for some quick things, I wanted to ask. I have one question that I'm actually going to break up into two parts. So right now you can buy Shade on either Sienna Swap or Secret Swap. I was just wondering which one is the preferred source of truth between the two of those in the eyes of Shade Protocol itself.
It's a really interesting question. I mean, at the end of the day, they're automated market makers that have certain levels of liquidity and certain levels of rewards. And whenever an Oracle looks at these things, it's going to be looking at the depth of the liquidity pool. So I would say, like, on an individual level, I'm always going to be biased towards depth of liquidity. From like a product standpoint, I think they're both great teams. They both are serving a very key function in Secret Network. So I like I said, that'll be the extent that I can endorse one or the other. Is I'm a big fan of deep liquidity, and we don't have much liquidity right now. So that's kind of where I stand on it.
Okay, and so but between those two same contract, different exchanges, the burning and conversion minting will be taking place on both of those, correct?
Yeah, so conversion minting will have its own UI UX. Like you'll go to shadeprotocol.io/swap, and there'll be a page there where it's like Silk to Shade, Shade to Silk, right? So that as a functionality thing, it could live on those dexes. I hadn't really thought about that. There's really no harm in having that UI UX live in as many places as possible. We do like to coalesce people around the Shade Protocol brand and application, and it's that general good network effect of getting people. I just want people like comfortable going to shadeprotocol.io. It's like, oh yeah, like there's charts here, there's news here, there's articles here, there's all this functionality. So I think we'll be biased towards placing things there, but yeah, 100%. Yeah. We'll see where that swap functionality can live.
Cool. And yeah, hopefully when we build out all of the educational tools that we want to, we can even have maybe a link from Shade Protocol to our website. But the last thing that I wanted to ask was so I self-admittedly I was a Luna maxi before I came across the Shade Reveal, which was an awesome introduction to learning all about what you guys are cooking up over here. And the most amount of expertise that I had in that ecosystem was right after Columbus 5 was released. And from my understanding, that implementation of the network burned the extra amount of either token after the swap mechanism and their seigniorage process. So instead of it going to the DAO, it went to a burn wallet never to be seen from again. I was wondering which avenue Shade was going with on this front.
Oh yeah, 100% burn right out of the gates. So I think it's very clear that conversion, essentially what they're doing is they're conversion minting and just like minting money every time someone conversion minted, and went straight back to the treasury. It's like kind of interesting because it's pulling value from everyone else that's not the treasury. So if you're biased towards the treasury being really big and technically those token holders that are getting diluted have ownership of the treasury, then it's like, it's kind of good, kind of bad, but it's, I mean, at the end of the day, it's inflationary and it's value dilutive towards one specific entity. So I think avoiding that type of conversion minting inflation is against, it's our principles say we want to avoid non-collateralized inflation, barring the initial bootstrapping, right? So TLDR, no, there's no inflation on conversion minting with Shade Protocol. And I also feel bad too, because the initial white paper, and there's still like graphics out there where I'm like, oh yeah, like Luna's inflationary. And I have all these people that are like, Luna's not inflationary. I'm like, yeah, like rewind the clock like 6 months ago. Like that material was 100% accurate and relevant when we said it was inflationary. So I'm very happy they made the switch away from it. And I hope the Luna Maxis out there that have encountered Shade calling Luna inflationary understand what it means to it's something called history.
Yeah, no, I've gotten into a lot of those discussions. And also, there's inflationary and deflationary mechanisms on many
Yep.
parts of these protocols. So just like using that word where it fits into a certain instance, it never makes for a good conversation.
Yeah, and then inflation in Web3 is really interesting because it's like usually inflation is ultimately pulling value from a set of entities that are not participating in a certain set of actions, right? And it goes towards a certain set of actors. So in Web3, like the set of actors that are participating usually are serving a very good public good. The same problem arises though, for instance, like for proof of stake networks. Why would the validators ever vote to give themselves less inflationary rewards, right? How much should they actually be getting paid to secure the network? These are super uncomfy questions that people don't ask. I'm okay with asking it, but I'll also say Shade Protocol, we don't have to worry about securing an underlying layer one. And so that is part of the benefit of not having our own layer one. And if we ever did have our own layer one, we would be thinking very long and hard about that question. So,
well, I think that's about all the content we were hoping to cover for tokenomics. Before I say my last bit, Carter, is there anything in particular right now that you would encourage community members to get involved with specifically? I'm not sure if there's any, if testnet's still going on right now, or if there's any other things that the protocol is specifically looking for community help on right now.
Couple of things. Thank you. First off, thank you guys so much for being such gracious hosts. This is like it's surreal to know there's other people around the world and you guys get it. You know, like you get the vision. It's tangible. It's real. So thank you for having me on. Thank you for building out this platform. How you can involved? For sure, go follow House of Shade on Twitter. Follow these guys. Support these guys at the beginning of their journey, the middle of the journey, and wherever the journey takes them. So like these are amazing community members, and be sure to support them at every turn. Second off, join the Discord, get involved in like PEG research, social impact channel, economics channel. There's a place for you. If you're someone in the world, you get the vision, you want to be a part of this. There is a home for you somewhere. Let us plug you in. We'll find a spot. Discord's a great first place to do that. The Shade Grants program, we'll be sharing more details of that in the coming week or two. I need to just go to Dun Bros Coffee and just really like iron out the grants program and making sure people are crystal clear on like what's available and how to go about applying. And then the Incentivized Testnet stuff, there's a Discord channel for that. Get involved. Once again, that's on us. We should have provided better clarity throughout the process in the last like month. We can do better and definitely be actively looking to improve the communications and the structure on that front for the community. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to link Shade Protocol Tokenomics Medium article in the description of the video, as well as links to Shade Protocol's website, our Twitter, Shade Protocol's Twitter. That way everyone can stay up to date. Also, like Carter said, I would definitely recommend anyone who's not already in the Shade Protocol Discord, go join. You can see all the developments going on with governance, PEG research, the economics, incentivized testing. It's very open. All of this development is out in the open for the most part. And so I encourage any community member that wants to learn more in real time, go join those channels. That's the best place. Yeah. And thank you, Carter, for coming on, for being an awesome first guest. I know this past week with the airdrop has been fairly stressful and time consuming. So hopefully you're at the point where you can get a little bit of extra sleep. But I know the roadmap ahead is still long and busy.
Yeah, well, the good, I guess my final thing I'll say is the thing that's comforting to me is we've, as a team and as a community, like we have a very clear set of principles. We have a growing community and we know where we need to go next. And the stuff that gets me excited is knowing that more and more of this is now coming down to execution as opposed to forethought, right? Like we have really researched deeply and made sure that we're headed in the right direction. And the more it comes down to just execution, the more excited I get. So.
All right.
Thank you, Carter.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you everyone for listening.
Yep. Have a good one, guys. As I wave with my pitch black webcam.
Take care, bro.
See you.
Yeah.